Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the new episode of C++. In this episode, we will be going to learn about variables. What are the variables in C++? So, variable is just a memory location, and naming that memory location is called a variable. Why we need a variable? Variable is a basic unit of storage where we store our data. For example, if we want to perform some addition, then we need to store our numbers at some location. And what's that location? It's the location in the memory where we store our data. And naming that location is just called a variable. So we use those variables and do some addition to produce our output. We can do multiple things with our variable. We can assign a data type to our variable. We can change the value of our variable. Okay, so how the variable structure looks like? Okay, let's get started and see how the structure of a variable looks like.
So if we start talking about the structure of a variable, so it can be broken down into three parts. So the first part is the data type. Data type is the type that we can store into our variable. For example, we can use integer data type, character, or a float. And there are other many more types we can use with our variable. The second part is the name of the variable. We can also say that the name of the variable is the identification of that variable from which we call that variable. The third part of that variable is the value, for example, which is 15. And as previously we were talking about that the variable is just a memory location and the naming that memory location is called a variable. For example, here you can see in that diagram that there is a RAM and in the RAM at some memory location 15 has been stored and this memory location is named as 8. So this is how the structure of the variables look like. Okay, so start. Okay, so let's start declaring a variable and see how we can declare a variable. Before start declaring a variable, we need to know some rules. So let's see what those rules are.
Before declaring a variable, we must know about the naming convention of a variable. Okay, so there are 5 rules we need to keep in our mind before declaring our first variable. Variable can contain alphabet, digits and underscore. Variable can start variable name can start with alphabet and underscore but not with a digit. Variables are case sensitive. For example, if you are naming your variable with uppercase and a same variable and you are naming a same name in lowercase, then those both variables are different variables because C++ have a naming convention of variable is a case sensitive. Variables name cannot be the keywords of C++. For example, integer, float, these are the keywords which C++ use, and we cannot use these keywords as a name of our variable. C++ variable cannot contain a special character. For example, a dollar sign, hash sign, we cannot put these special characters in our variable name. Okay, so let's see these naming convention into our code and see how these naming convention works and how we declare our first variable. So let's see in our code.
First, we will type the data type, that what type of data we want to store in our variable. So for example, I will be using integer type data for our variable. So I will type int, then we need to name our variable. So I will be naming our variable as var. The third part is to assigning a value, but this part is an optional part. For example, if you don't assign a value, then it's just a declaration of a variable. So let's declare a variable int var and let's see that our code builds successfully or not. So now we will build this and let's see. So it's built successfully. At this moment, this variable holds some garbage value. Because when we declare a variable and runs it, so some memory location has been reserved for this var variable and that memory location has some garbage value because we have just declared our variable and we didn't initialize this variable with some value. So if let's put a breakpoint on a written statement and run our code, then we can see some value and we just hover on our variable, so we can see that this variable store a value 464. It means it having some garbage value in it. If we try to see out, if we stop this program and we try to see out our var variable and we run this program again, so we can see that the compiler will give you an error that the uninitialized local variable var used. So it means we need to initialize our variable first before doing some cout or cout stuff on that variable. So when we initialize this variable int var is equal to 0, and then we will start compiling our code, then we can see that our and we can see, let's run it again. So we can see that the 0 has been printed. So it means that we need to initialize our variable if we are using our variable for cout stuff. But if we just declaring our variable, so that variable will be storing some garbage value in it. So this is how declaration and definition of the variables works.
Now we know how to define and declare a variable. Now we need to know about the types of variable. So there are three types of variable. Number one is local variable, number two is a static variable, and number three is instance variable. So what is a local variable? Local variable is a variable which is defined in a block or method or a constructor is called a local variable. Okay, so what is the scope of local variable? The scope of a local variable is only is that block in which it's defined. When you entered into that block and the scope of that variable starts, and when the scope and when we exit from that block or a function return its call, then the scope of that variable is finished, the variable is destroyed, and that particular variable is only accessible in that block. Outside the block, nobody can access that variable and can use that variable. No, nobody can use that variable outside that block. Okay, so let's see how these local variables look into the code. So let's jump into the code and see how the local variables look like.
The variable var is also the local variable. Let's define another function named as local variable and define one more variable int var is equal to 0 in this method as well. And let's print this var as well. Let's define some other value, not the same value as in the var having in the main function. Let's define as 1. And let's call this function in the main as well. For example, we will call local variable method, and let's see what output we will get. Let's run this code and see what's the output we will get. So we can see we have got 0 and 1. So let's understand this code in detail. The local variable is another function and main is another function, and the scope of these both variable have different. For example, for this variable int var is equal to 0 is only and only have the scope in this main function, and the local variable method has, and the int var is equal to 1 as only and only scope till local variable. So these both variables are different in the memory. So that's how local variables works. They have a different scope, and their scope is only related to their method.
So other type of a variable is static variable. So static variable is a variable which only allocated once in a lifetime for that executable. So we can say that the static variable lifetime is equal to the lifetime of that program. So the program starts, that that variable allocated into that memory, and when the program exits, then that variable will get off from the memory. So there's a big difference between a local variable and a static variable is that the static variable has a lifetime is equal to the lifetime of our program, but local variable has just the lifetime equal to that block. When that block's end or the call and the function returns its call, the variable is removed from the memory. So let's see into the code how the static variable works.
The static variable is declared or defined using a static keyword. Let's understand a scope of a static variable. Let's create one more method, void static variable, and let's declare or define one static variable. So static variable is defined using a static keyword. First we will type static, then we will type the type of that variable, then we will type name of that variable and define some value. So this is how static variable declare or define. After declaring a static variable, let's see and understand the scope of a static variable. To understand the scope of the static variable, we need to see out this static variable, and let's increment this static variable in the end of this method. Now we need to call this method at least for the 3 times into the main function. Let's call this method static variable method 3 times into the main method, and let's run this program and see the output of the program. So we can see it prints 0, then it prints 1, then it prints 2. So why this is not printing 0 at every time? Because at every function call of the static variable, this var variable is not reinitialized to 0, because the scope or the lifetime of this static variable is equal to the lifetime of the program. So static variable is only declared into the memory only for one time. After that, when we increment this var plus plus, so it increments that value of the var to 1, then and we call that function again, so it increment it to 3 to 2. So for example, if we print for the fourth time, so it will print 3. So that's how static variable works into the C++.
So third type of the variable is the instance variable. Instance variable are the variable which are declared in a class. For now, you guys can't completely understand how the instance variable will work, but you will know in the future when I will be telling you about how the classes work in C++. You will get to know about the instance variable. The variable which we declare in a class, those variables are called instance variable, and the instance variable lifetime or scope is only depends on that object of a class. Till the object exists, the instance variable exists into the memory. When the objects get deleted, the instance variable also gets deleted. So I will be showing how the instance variable look like in future when I will be telling you about the classes. So right now I will not going to show you how the instance variable work into the code, but when I will be teaching you about the C++ classes, then I will be showing you how the instance variable work. I hope you guys enjoy this video, and now you know about how the variables work in C++. So thank you guys for watching my video. Please subscribe my channel and share with your friends and keep supporting. Thank you guys.